Good morning and welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. We're getting started on your Ukraine war update for November 2nd, 2023. Most of this data is from last night. I'm streaming this fairly early in the morning. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on, kind of give you a summary of what's the situation in Ukraine. As per normal, this is done live, so there's not been any real editing or changes to this material. So it's not going to be the neat and tidy like a daily update video. So let's go ahead and get started talking. If you do want to add a comment, absolutely please do, because I will be watching for them. All right, let's go ahead and get started. And boonk, boonk. All right, perfect. Let me see if I can get this a little bit larger here so you guys can read a little bit better. There we go. Zaluzny, the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, gave not an interview, but wrote a position paper, effectively, an essay titled Modern Positional Warfare and How to Win It. And then in an interview with The Economist, he outlined the current operational environment in Ukraine and noted that despite several previously successful Ukrainian counteroffensive operations in 2022, the war is now gradually moving to a positional form. So the Institute for the Study of War did a great job of summarizing what General Zaluzny was talking about. So let's go ahead and go through what Institute for the Study of War says, maybe talk about it just a touch, and then we'll get into what's going on in the rest of the war. Let's see. There is, of course, the biggest problem with positional warfare in this case is that Ukraine does not have the big advantage in positional warfare. Russia does, but that doesn't mean that that all is lost, for lack of a better way to say it. There is currently military parity between Ukraine and Russia, meaning that at this point, neither side can truly gain a significant upper hand without some other factor significantly changing the situation. Now, in my opinion, there are some factors that are changing that situation, but that is not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about General Zaluzny's comments. In his interview, Zaluzny acknowledged that technological and tactical parity between opposing forces in Ukraine has resulted in a stalemate similar to the case of the First World War. In the more extensive essay on the subject, Zaluzny notably refrained from classifying the situation as a full stalemate and instead framed it as a positional war resulting from aspects of this technological tactical parity. According to Zaluzny, Ukraine's ability to overcome this technological tactical parity will be contingent on Ukraine's ability to secure 5 main operational components that have become particularly significant since the summer of 2023. Apologies, I think I caught the mute button in time before I sneeze there. So let's continue on. Gaining air superiority, breaching Russian mine barriers in depth, increasing the effectiveness of counter-battery combat, creating and training the necessary reserves, and building up electronic warfare capabilities. Now, there are specifics that he offered on this, and let's see if I can quickly scan this and get you the summaries here. Significant improvements in drone capabilities and to gain air superiority along the front lines. That means overloading Russian air defenses, neutralizing Russian drone strikes, degrading Russian visibility on the front, and that's done by deploying cheap drones en masse, and developing specific drones meant to target Russian strike drones, employing electronic warfare complexes throughout the front. That's all the challenges, basically all the things that would counter the current situation. Then Ukraine needs to introduce the necessary command and control processes for electronic warfare complexes, increase their production thereof, streamline engagements with volunteer organizations that provide smaller electronic warfare complexes, and then improve their countermeasures and develop new drones with electronic warfare in mind. To gain counter-battery superiority, Zaluzny recommended that Ukrainian forces use more reconnaissance and strike drones to improve Ukrainian counter-battery fire, and argued that Ukrainian forces need to strengthen GPS support for Ukrainian counter-battery units and increase the number of counter-battery assets. Improved sensors, more widespread and varied mine clearing capabilities, and anti-drone equipment will allow Ukrainian forces to successfully breach Russian mine barriers in depth while under concealment. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a moment. Electronic warfare situation is a major component of the current stalemate in there. Russia has managed to develop a fairly robust electronic warfare situation. Ukraine has been countering that with technological advances using things like multiplex signals that are broad-banded, broad spectrum, and frequency hopping. Using not just off-the-shelf, commercially available drones, but advancing the receivers and transmitters in them to make them more resistant to electronic warfare. He does mention strengthening GPS support. My concern there is that GPS since it signals from the satellites, is on known frequencies, easy to jam, and significantly, it's really easy to jam GPS. You flood specific frequencies with electronic hash and garbage, or just false signals, and you end up in a situation where the GPS cannot reliably be used. That said, I don't know what the military has for additional capabilities in that regard. They may have additional features that I don't know about that would make the situation a lot more robust compared. But they most of their GPS systems I've seen in use also have an inertial navigation system as a backup, or sometimes even as a primary, with the GPS acting as a confirming factor. So I don't know the details there. I would love it if we had a military technology specialist who could kind of point out whether there might be some additional features that the military uses to prevent their GPS from being jammed. That'd be awesome to know. All right, so moving on. He called on Ukraine to introduce a unified state register for draftees, reservists, and those liable for military service to prepare a necessary reserve for Ukrainian forces. At this point, Ukraine has, by and large, managed to make do with volunteers that are those who have stood up and successfully moved forward. Some drafting, of course, some people being told to serve, basically, but especially early on, they had a tremendous number of volunteers, to the point where they had a problem with issuing them equipment and getting them trained. So he's saying to streamline that whole situation and put up good military reserves that will give Ukraine options to expand or focus their offensives in such ways. Now, that's kind of what Zaluzny had to say. He also particularly highlighted the need for Ukraine to develop its own defense industry to sustain operations, long-range strike capabilities, and an asymmetric munitions arsenal to break out of this parity. And I have always contended that Ukraine producing its own weapons is a vital component to actually put Ukraine in a winning position. One of the things about America is that we've always been considered the arsenal of democracy. That's because, well, there's a bunch of reasons for that, but among them is that we had a tremendous production capacity, one that needs to be redeveloped. But until America does, Ukraine's got to develop their own indigenous production capacity to be able to keep their howitzers firing, their artillery firing, their guns firing, their tanks firing. They've got to be able to produce all that ammunition and the necessary replacement parts to keep all of that equipment operational. And in fact, I'd contend that to a certain extent, they need to start producing domestic weaponry of their own design, or that they can produce locally that can take advantage of Western ammunition while also being indigenously produced. And and of course to produce their own ammunition in general. Okay, so let's go over some of the other stuff. There's some good stuff in here as well. Russian forces are likely preparing for another wave of highly attritional infantry-led ground assaults on Ukrainian positions in the Avdiivka area. Every time they've run a whole bunch of hardware in there, they've ended up losing a whole lot of hardware. But all of these assaults do take their toll on the Ukrainian defenders. They not only will lose personnel in each assault, but they'll lose equipment. They'll have their positions will get degraded by artillery fire. Each one, it may cost Russia 10 times as much or 5 times as much, but even so, it's still going to require a lot of Ukrainian lives, ammunition, and equipment to be able to continue to hold Avdiivka. Yes, they've got a lot of years of preparation in that area. Hi, Theodore. Thank you very much for coming on board. Glad to see you here. And please just keep me on the background. I'll be talking for a bit here. So anyway, even though Russia is losing a lot more in Avdiivka, Ukraine is not losing nothing in that area. So they'll have to continue to resupply. They'll have to continue to bring in reserves and fresh troops and fresh equipment in order to stop the Russians from taking that area. We'll have some more about that in a bit. There's some interesting things going on over there, and we're going to talk about them. The current situation near Avdiivka is a microcosm of the Russian General Staff's wider failure to internalize and disseminate lessons learned by Russian forces during previous failed offensive efforts in Ukraine to other force groupings throughout the theater. Basically, the situation is that if somebody in one part of the front, say in Kherson, learns something, that institutional knowledge is hard for Russia to disseminate across the front lines. General Staff is not properly taking those lessons and reapplying them elsewhere in ways that give them a more advanced capability on the battlefield. That's to Ukraine's advantage because they're able to quickly deploy newly learned information to various parts of the front in a hurry. Their communication, their command, their control is that level of quality at this point in time. Rest of this is just basic summary of what's going on. Let's see if there's anything really important here. The Russian military appears poised to reestablish its military districts as the primary joint headquarters for its ground forces while transferring naval assets back to the command of the Russian Navy. They had kind of mixed their commands into combined Army and Navy and Air Force commands. Well, they're looking to spin that off again into a separate naval command, mainly because it seems like they just aren't able to really truly coordinate, and having that separate command will allow them to prioritize targets better for themselves. It's just they're just having challenges keeping things going. All right, so let's move on to the news out of Ukraine itself. I did take a look at the weather coming up, and it looks like there is some rain in the forecast. However, it's just for the next couple of days, and then there's a little bit later in the week. But overall, we're looking at relatively good weather with occasional spats of rain over the next 2 weeks. So it's going to be pretty decent weather conditions for the time. We're waiting on the really nasty stuff to start, but it is at least a change in the progress there. Heavy rains and winds are coming to Crimea on November 3rd. That'll be tomorrow. And a storm warning has been announced. So they're expecting a very strong storm system to won't go through with rain, very strong in southern, central, and eastern regions, thunderstorms, and easterly winds with a transition to southwestern winds of 15 to 20 meters per second, which I would have to then convert to miles per hour because 15 meters per second, 2 miles per hour, about 33 miles an hour. So that's not a tremendously bad set of wind, but it's certainly not going to be pleasant for regular everyday operations, and it may be above the limits of many of the drones, especially the smaller drones that the Russians and the Ukrainians may be using, which may mean that we've got going to have a brief period where drone warfare is going to temporarily cease. High winds tends to be one of those things that are hard for drones to handle. In the realm of continuing to root out corruption in Ukraine, a Crimean, let's see, let me get this right. The ex-deputy head of the Kyiv City State Administration will be tried for fraud in Crimea. She embezzled about $2 million US. And let me see if I can get the rest of this here. She illegally took possession of other people's funds from the sale of Crimean real estate on an especially large scale. So they basically, this whole situation of fraud ended up in a situation that the Ukrainians, they really need to counter this type of corruption. So they're working on it. They got this lady, let's see, Irina Leonidovna Klitschitskaya. Sorry, that's a new name on me, so I don't know that one. So she was that deputy chairman of the Kyiv City State Administration, and she's done some corrupt things since then. This one I found interesting from the Kyiv Post. Ukraine is going to launch a comprehensive and accessible English language learning program. The government intends to make this program available to everyone, regardless of their financial situation and place of residence. Think about this for a moment. At least, and this is just me speculating here. Hi, Phil. Glad to have you on board. And yeah, that was a mouthful that I didn't practice, so I didn't have it ready. But interesting to see this English language piece here. Ukraine currently has Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers as the two primary languages in the country, especially in the East, where Russian is a much more spoken language. By providing broad English language training, they avoid the situation of saying, okay, Russian speakers, you must learn Ukrainian or you will not be able to function in our current country. By teaching them English instead, that puts those people on not only a track to be more productive in Ukraine, but more productive on a global business scale. English is the typical language of business pretty much anywhere you go. And in fact, in aviation, if you fly anywhere in the world, the air traffic controllers, the pilots, everybody speaks English on the radio. That's just to keep things universal and functional, even though you'd have to train people in that language of English. At least everybody will be able to understand what's being said and the information communicated. So instead of forcing Russian speakers to go to Ukrainian, by providing the way for them to get to English, which gives them benefits beyond just the work in country, and it will make it so they can be productive on the world stage as well. And as Phil just said, they could ease the pro-Russian sentiment as well, giving them access to Western media and ease of travel. Absolutely. And that's what I'm thinking is going to really make a difference. This is something that is intended to be inclusive, not only for economic reasons, but for social and internal reasons as well. I think this will be the type of thing that could bring the country together. Thank you, Lucille. Absolutely correct. The English teaching just it feels like something that is well designed and well tuned to really make a difference in the social situation inside Ukraine. Moving on to the Kyiv Independent here, they took a poll, and other than the war itself, Ukrainians are most concerned about corruption. Corruption, along with low salaries and pensions, ranks as the top concerns of Ukrainians besides Russia's ongoing war, which was the top item. And that was by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. I've mentioned this several times. Corruption in government, corruption in private life, corruption overall is what destroys nations. If you have to look at one of your public servants and say, are you so corrupt that the only way I'm going to get anything done is by greasing your palm and providing a bribe, then the country is going to collapse. It is not a way that you can sustain a long-term country. Trust, the ability to trust in your government and in your government workers and in your public servants is vital to a unified nation and a forward-looking nation that can be both economically, politically, and culturally powerful for the long term. That does not mean that you have to be homogenous in every way, shape, or form, but it does mean that that you've got to develop, sustain, and maintain that trust. Otherwise, your country is going to be spinning around the bowl. Ukraine has been working really hard to root out that corruption. It just makes a huge difference. Yeah, Phil, that's absolutely correct. Reducing corruption increases trust, finance, and public services, and makes for a very strong house. Hi, Paul. Glad to have you on board. Thank you very much for joining. Yeah, we're just kind of finishing off with the Ukraine portion of the news, and we're going to go into Russia in just a moment here. But yeah, corruption just sucks the life and vitality out of an economy. It sucks the life and vitality out of a government, and it sucks the life, vitality, and trust out of the citizens of that nation. So, in my opinion, if you have to fix one thing about a country, fix the corruption, and that will put your country on a much better path to progress forward. And by the way, thank you all for joining me. This is apparently mornings are the right time to be here with these streams here, because I'm glad to see you all. So thank you very much for coming in. Let's go ahead and jump into Russia news for a little bit here. For the last couple of days, they've been making smoke at the Crimea Bridge, and an air raid alarm has been sounding. Now, this is probably just smokescreen. In fact, that's a smokescreen generator functioning right there. But they're apparently really concerned about drone attacks right now. So they're going to keep that. Well, every time they do this, it closes the bridge. That makes the bridge less effective, less capable. And even with the recent repairs, it means that they cannot use it for effective, reliable logistics. It's effectively closed. Now, this is one of the few cases where I can see that somebody over in Russia has been paying attention. They have been looking for those little bits of good news they can put out there to try and make their soldiers look better. However, even so, I'm going to give them kudos for this one. I know that's not a very popular thing here, but seriously, these soldiers of the Russian Guard, now the Guard is not the frontline troops most of the time, but they were helping out in Donetsk, People's Republic, and they said, notice there was no park in the area. So they built a little park in an abandoned wasteland area. And that gave the kids somewhere to play and to be happy. I see these types of stories from the Ukrainian side all the time. I so rarely see them from the Russian side that when they do it, it stands out so much more than normal. So they built a playground and the kids can use it now. I think that's really good. It shows that there are some hearts over there on the Russian side every once in a while. Of course, that's compared to the story that I mentioned the other day, which was one of the Russian soldiers murdering an entire family. So I'm not saying they're angels over there. I'm just saying that at least sometimes there's something positive they do, and we should acknowledge that. If you have been paying attention, you've noticed that there were a couple of airstrikes against airfields in, Luhansk and Berdyansk. That has meant that Russia has been forced to move their operations for their aircraft farther back. And now that means that much of these helicopters are now at the Taganrog Air Base. Now let's figure out where Taganrog is. So, and just because I can, I'm just going to use my old Google here, and we'll see where that's at. It's amazing to me that I can just sit here and quickly type in a city name and get an idea where it's at. Okay, so Taganrog, we can see right here this black border. That is where the Russia-Ukraine border is. They've literally moved their helicopters outside of Ukraine so that Ukraine can't use Western weapons to strike their helicopters. That's sharp thinking on their part. Right up until somebody says, "Oh, I'm sorry, did I say you couldn't use it on Russian territory? I meant you couldn't use it on Russian civilian targets in their territory, but military targets like this would be a good thing to use them on." If they make that decision, that will make a tremendous difference in how Russia tries to prosecute this war. But that is so far back that the helicopters have a much longer response time. It's literally east of Mariupol. It's well behind and away from the front lines. It's going to take them another hour to get to where they can actually engage targets. That gives them less loiter time, more fuel usage, and less effectiveness on the battlefield. Yeah, that's exactly right, Phil. That they've literally moved the helicopters to where the U.S. is now the one protecting them by saying that the Ukrainians can't use their weapons on that spot. That said, the Ukrainians are sharp cookies. I'll bet you there's already plans now that they've kind of seen how these ATACMS missiles and things work, I'll bet you there's already plans to build their own version that will be entirely domestically produced and therefore entirely free of those limits. So that's fun. That is absolutely fun. That's where those helicopters ended up at, 21 of them. Rosgvardia units, this is an interesting little bit of an ad. The other day I mentioned that a Wagner-affiliated Telegram channel, and I said at the time that they were now Russian governmental affiliated. Well, that's not necessarily fully true. However, the former mercenaries of Vagner PMC will be headed by the 25-year-old son of the late Prigozhin, Pavel, and that this unit is being created on the basis of the 136th Brigade of the Russian Guard. So, once again, Wagner may still be independent, but they're basically being pulled right into the Ministry of Defense. So, that's the situation with old Wagner these days. There's probably still some of the accounts are still just Wagner and not affiliated with Pavel's new whatever, but there we go. So, there's some additional recruiting going on for the Russians here. They've seen a decline in interest in contract service, and they're looking for new cannon fodder. Well, it turns out there's also people who are in debt. Maybe they can't make their mortgage payments. Maybe they can't pay their car payments off. They have got debts out there. They're overdue. And basically, these are people who will now become very much, shall we say, cannon fodder, that they can be drafted based on having those debts and having those debts deferred by their service. So they're trying to tempt more Russians into joining up, like this clueless guy who's grinning like a crazy person with his eyes wide open. Over in Crimea, Russia has said that fertilizer in bags will be allowed to be transported through the Kerch Strait. The number of items or the type of items that can be transported through the Kerch Strait these days and underneath the Kerch Bridge has been severely limited since it turned out that the Ukrainians could still strike the bridge. Well, they've now said fertilizer in bags can be transported through the strait. And last I checked, fertilizer, even in bags, makes a really good fertilizer bomb. So they might not be so happy about this decision to start allowing fertilizer, even if it is in bags. You don't fortify an area if you don't think it's under threat. The Russian army has continued to fortify their defensive lines in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine including dragon's teeth along the front lines. Now, this one originally was posted as being part of the Crimea, as being Crimea taking these dragon's teeth on. But it's clear that what we're seeing is that the Russians feel that they are vulnerable all across all of the occupied territories. They've been putting dragon's teeth and fortifications in Crimea along all the beaches. They have been putting them into everywhere they can in southern Ukraine. It tells me that Russia knows that truly they are vulnerable in those areas. 70% of Russians say that they would be happy to end the war in Ukraine and would like it to do it really fast. But not if it meant handing back all of that occupied territory they've already captured. And that's going to be the problem, because Ukraine's not going to negotiate until they've got all of that occupied territory back under the Ukrainian flag. This is the sticking point. Vladimir Putin right now has to find a way to make it so his citizens, he's got to find a way to keep his citizens happy. And the problem is that right now the war in Ukraine is only popular if they're winning. And yet they're not winning. They're barely even stalemating at certain places. So the Russians are like, look, if it stopped right here, we'd be happy as a clam. Vladimir Putin wouldn't be, but the Russian people would be. The problem is Ukrainians have a vote in the matter. And that's kind of everything about Russia. We're going to jump into international in just a moment here. But before we do, is there any questions or anything that people want to talk about? Let me know. This is going to be a moment to give my voice a moment to relax. I recorded an 18-page script last night, and it was long. It was long. And a lot of talking. Made it, my voice is just a little strained today. But that's okay. Let's go ahead and get on with what's going on the international front. Let's see, move over here and boop. There we go. A Brooklyn resident and 2 Russian-Canadian nationals were charged with massive sanctions evasion and export control scheme. This has been later updated, which I think I've still got a little bit over here. 4 men were charged with this. And they were trying to send $7 million worth of semiconductors, circuits, and more to Russia. They are the same make, model, and part number found in seized Russian weapons platforms. So that's where they're getting it from. They've got these shadow buyers wherever they can get them. And those shadow buyers will buy it in supposedly legitimate ways. They'll take that, they'll bundle it up, they'll ship it over to Russia, they'll put it in a missile, they'll fire the missile at Ukraine. This is where the challenge is in all of this. Yes, the official channels have been locked down on, but you can barely, if you can't track every single person who might grab a handful of chips, throw it into a little box and ship it to Russia, you're going to have some evasion there. And since these are small things like microprocessors and microchips, you can fit a lot into a little box, or throw it into your suitcase and fly it over, or whatever. So sanctions evasion is an art form. And yes, Iran's perfected it over the years, and I'll bet you that's where Russia has learned it from. Okay, let's see. If you don't help Ukrainians, U.S. soldiers will fight. This is from the Senate hearing the other day. If you, like me, were too busy and missed it, I did catch a little bit of the hearings that Lloyd Austin and Secretary Blinken had with the U.S. Congress, where they talked about financial support to Ukraine and everything going on with that. And the parts I saw, they did a very good job providing a stout defense of aid to Ukraine. Though, I mean, there's some things you can quibble with, like, for instance, without financial support from the U.S. and NATO, Ukrainians can lose this war. That's true, because NATO, most of the countries providing that support are NATO countries. though NATO as an organization isn't necessarily providing that support. But without that financial support, Ukraine would be all on its own. And while I don't think they'd surrender, I think they'd find it a much tougher situation to be in that could result in them losing the war. This is them saying that, look, they need the resources to win. Anthony Blinken said if Putin is allowed to continue acting with impunity, he will not only not stop in Ukraine, but will potentially head to the next NATO country, which will cause us to fulfill our obligations under Article 5 of the NATO alliance. Right now, we are optional, for lack of a better way to put it. We have the option of sending whatever mix of hardware or whatever else we want to Ukraine, including nothing. I think that would be bad policy to send nothing, mind you, just saying. But as it stands right now, we have options. If they go over, if Ukraine ends up losing, the next step will be a member of NATO. And then we will no longer have an option. We will be forced to provide all resources necessary to stop the threat, including boots on the ground and soldiers in weaponry and in harm's way. Ukraine is tremendously brave. They're tremendously capable. They're telling us that they don't need the soldiers, they need the gear. They need the equipment. They need the ability to overwhelm Russia's technological situation and be better at this war than Russia is. That's what they need. And right now, if we provide that, it'll prevent Russia from continuing to stomp its way through Eastern Europe. Oh yeah, it gets bad. Once they start touching the Baltic states, things go downhill fast. White House, they did say, the White House has said that they would veto a separate package to Israel that doesn't have Ukraine support in it. And the Republicans did provide what I think is a relatively reasonable list of demands. The Republicans did. They have required Joe Biden and President Zelensky to provide Congress with an actual victory strategy. They're doing a good job. All they need to do is say, look, this is what victory looks like. This is our strategy to get there, and we need this help to do it. And this is a clear idea of how Ukraine will win and how long it will take. Now, they at least hedge their bets by saying idea instead of I need a date, because dates are always a problem in this type of thing. And they want to understand the ultimate goal. Now, admittedly, I understand the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is simple. Russia entirely out of Ukraine, including through everything through the 1991 borders. That's simple. That is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal plus one would be a Russia that is so defanged that it cannot attack Ukraine again. But the goal of this war for Ukraine is to kick Russia clean out of the 1991 borders. And if they can pull that off, they can deal with a hostile Russia on an ongoing basis. Russia would be unwise to keep up the hostilities, especially after being kicked back to the 1991 borders. But who am I to predict Vladimir Putin? I am way not crazy enough to do that. So I think that there's some good conditions that the Republicans are putting in there, in the sense of at least getting them to define victory, what it would take to get there, and how long it's going to take. Because that's one of the things that a lot of people are not seeing is a well-articulated plan, a well-articulated goal, how it benefits, and the positive effects it has for the U.S. So let's go ahead and get those things taken care of. That's what I say. So this is an interesting comment, which is on the international front here. I'm only pointing it out because Iran has turned out to be a central player in all of the negative things going on right now. Now, I still think Russia is kind of the head over there in many ways, but Iran is, we'll say they're going to be the vice president of evil people for today. If you want to do damage to the head of the octopus, Khomeini and his Iranian Guard Corps terrorists would be where you would start. And there have been a series of protests against the government in Iran. The thing is, if we had supported these protests when they first started happening, or the last time they happened, or the time before that where they happened, there's a pretty good chance there wouldn't be the government in Iran capable of waging war against Ukraine via Russia or Israel via Hamas and Hezbollah. So look at that for a long moment and think to yourself, exactly what could have been if the protests against the Khomeini government had been supported properly. But that's just a thought process for it. So, there we go. This one I wanted to bring to the fore. Georgian President Zarabashvili fears that Putin may use relocants or relocated people to launch the Doctrine of Protection of Russian-Speaking Citizens and start a war. Think about it for a long moment there. Crimea, they've set up a lease on the military base in Sevastopol. That lease was why there were so many Russian speakers that lived in Crimea. And the more Russian speakers that were living in Crimea, because they kept moving in, and the more they drove the economy, the stronger the support of the Russians was in Crimea. That became Russia's casus belli, their reason for war. So they flooded the area with Russian-speaking people that were Russian citizens, then said, we have got to defend the rights of our Russian-speaking people and go in there militarily. They did the same thing in Donetsk and Luhansk. They've done the same thing in several other countries. And now the Georgian president is seeing the same thing happening in the occupied areas of Georgia, the areas that have become separatist regions, the areas where Russia is establishing a new naval base on the Black Sea, which means that they're going to start marching in a bunch of Russian speakers, bunch of Russian speakers who then become their casus belli, their reason for war. I hate to say it, it's a very obvious and well-telegraphed tactic that they use. They set up a situation where they have a reason for war. They march in there for the war, and they take over the area and govern the place. And then all of a sudden it says, we want to be part of Russia. The Georgian president knows what he's talking about here. All right, I'm seeing several comments going by here. Yeah. Yeah, fish. How long does it take to catch a fish? Exactly. Now, if you're a fisherman with a boat and a huge net, you've got a pretty good idea how long it's going to take you to at least get some fish in that net. But if you're like me, who doesn't want fish at all, it's going to take me a lot longer to get to the supermarket because I'm not motivated to go get it. Even then, I have stood with a fishing pole, a baited fishing pole, just so we're clear, and tried to fish for hours on end and got nothing. And done that for a day and another day and another day. And my buddy, who knows fishing way better than I do, can be pulling in fish after fish. So I know that that's the case. That's the problem is with the military situation is you can't predict it like it's not like it's an A plus B equals C situation. It's not like you can feed in all the numbers and say, we'll have it on July 27th, 2024 at 3:04 p.m. Things change. The whole situation in Georgia is really a bad thing. They've been taking it from Russians for a while now, and it's not, I think the world has let them down. I already discussed this when I was on a previous item, so I'll just keep on moving on. This was an interesting one. While we often see reports of U.S. monitoring or reconnaissance aircraft flying around the Black Sea, this is the first time I've really seen them specifying that they're flying around Kaliningrad. Makes me wonder exactly what's going on in Kaliningrad and maybe what military buildups we're not being told about. Now, that whole situation is another mess. There is no direct connection between Kaliningrad and Russia, even though it's only a short, very small area where there's two other countries that block the shortest possible route from Belarus to Kaliningrad. So that Russian enclave in Kaliningrad, it's going to be a problem if things really kick off. In the Dictator of the Week Club, we've got Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who has dissolved the country's parliament and called for early elections. This would be the same election day as a bunch of local municipalities, including the capital, Belgrade. But the thing is that, and this is me being geeky for just a moment here, is that not exactly what the Emperor in Star Wars did? Is he eliminated their parliament equivalent and went to direct ruling of the constituent states, or constituent planets, I should say. It feels like a power play, and I'm really concerned about what's going on in Serbia. You know, Phil, that's a great point. I didn't even think about that. If they've pulled SAM systems out of Kaliningrad and moved them to, say, Crimea, this would identify what those were and maybe indicate where they might be moving to. That's a good point. And that's kind of the international front. Let's see. Let me go ahead and flip over here. We're going to go into the front lines in just a minute here while I get things sorted kind of real quick. Just a quick scan of the comments. You know, you all are awesome. I'm watching this conversation and just amazing. You guys are well informed and paying attention. Thank you very much. You are great. All right, so let's go ahead and move over to the front lines. This is the live UA map. I don't typically use it on my streams or videos because it's just too much stuff, lack of a better way to say it. But this one is the only one that mentions that President Zelensky said the Russians are trying to advance near Volodar. You know, Phil, if you are just infantry, that still makes you 10 times more informed on military matters. You're paying attention, and you probably knew what you were doing. So I'd say thank you for being here, and glad to have your knowledge. So anyway, this one's the only one that mentions Volodar and the Russians attempting to advance in this area. I don't know any other details, but it is important to know that the Russians are definitely trying to do broad and a bunch of different little assaults to try and keep Ukraine off their game. And then we'll move over to the deep state map, where the only major change that we really need to look at is over here near Avdiivka. Get this kind of centered in. And I'm just going to go ahead and show you by backing up a step here. Hang on a second. I also want to get my ability to draw lines on the screen here. Is it already up? Maybe it's already up. Okay, it's already up. If you pay attention right about here, let's go ahead and advance the map. It looks like Russia has managed to basically break around the edge a little bit. These are areas that don't have any real strategic value, except for possibly pushing around the opposition they're seeing and maybe going to the north end of this rail line in hopes of finding areas that are not well defended by the Ukrainians. That said, there's something else interesting that's been going on in this area. And so let me see if I can find it real fast. There it is. This is from OSINT Technical. Russian forces apparently didn't bother to fully secure the flanks of their push on Avdiivka. with Ukrainian forces penetrating nearly a kilometer down the H-20 highway into the Russian line outside Krasnohorivka. That's right. Move this up a little bit. That's reportedly right here. That'll put them about there. That's moving right down the road. This will be their major supply route in this area, at least once they get the supplies in this section. There's no really good roads else into this area. In fact, their supply line, I believe, has to pretty much, the Russian supply line has to run, let me see if I can get it here, along this road here, down here, to this main road, the H-20 highway, and then they can come up and start reinforcing or resupplying their guys at Krasnohorivka. That is a complex route as far as the Russians are concerned, and it's one that would be easy to take under fire control or to dominate with drones, any of those things. If the Ukrainians are, in fact, able to push down this road, they can cut off the supply routes to Krasnohorivka pretty much instantaneously. They may already have done so, but either way, that means that the guys at Krasnohorivka that are currently trying to move closer to Avdiivka, or in the coke plant that's on the north end there, they may find themselves unable to move because they will have enemies at the rear and enemies at the front. And that's the interesting thing over here near Avdiivka. Everything else has been just basically positioning. The situation over here near this waste tip or slag heap has continued to be just reported multiple different ways. I've seen everything from the Ukrainians have full fire control over it to the Russians are standing on top of it. That said, I've seen no video proof that the Russians actually are on top of that slag heap and able to use it for any military purpose. There you go. This is a better view of what's going on near Kherson region, the Dnipro River. We already know that that based on geolocated footage and everything going on, that the Ukrainians have successfully pushed all the way up to the outskirts of Poema right here in this area. Also, they're pretty close to Podstepna, which put them right here. But the interesting part is actually over here at Krinky, where if you zoom in, you can see that the Ukrainians actually have full-on presence in this built-up section right here in Krinky. Now, this is just the confirmed information. We can see another spot right here. And each of these Russian marks right along in here are pretty old material at this point. So the truth is, at least it looks like, the Ukrainians have pretty stout control over pretty much this central section of Krinky right through here. And I'd guess probably along to here. This is just estimates based on the reports I'm seeing. And the Russians have been trying to push up these fields over here to the southeast. And every time they do, they get plastered with drones and artillery fire and keep getting taken out every time they get anywhere close to Krinky itself. They've also been trying to push in from this direction, but that's right along the riverbank, and therefore easily under Ukrainian fire control. Pretty impressive stuff going on over here. I don't know that it'll develop into anything much larger, but either way, it's a bit of tough fighting right over here. This is Wargonzo again right here. That's their report. In the Kherson Crimean direction, Ukrainian troops supported by artillery again attacked at Poema and Peshani. In Krinky, there are oncoming battles. Russian artillery is targeting the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces in the village. Also under fire are Ukrainian units in Kherson, Antonovka, Sadovka, etc., etc., etc. Anytime they say they're under fire, just means they're lobbing shells their direction. But this is where the hottest activity on the front is. It's here in Avdiivka. These, however, here's an interesting bit. War Gonzo's even reporting that the Ukrainian armed forces are making some advances to the west of Robotna. Let's go ahead and grab the map here and go move over to Robotna. I've gotten to where I know the map of Ukraine better than I know the map of my own home state. So it's pretty hilarious. Yep. Over the last couple of days, here's Robotna area here. The main advances we've been seeing just lately have been in this direction right here. And it looks like they're making significant progress this direction. There's still reports where they're moving towards Kopani a little bit at a time. My guess is that they're jumping into these tree lines right in here. And there are some fortifications right about in here or so that I think they're still moving towards and working their way along. Overall, the situation in both Verbova and Robotna is still dynamic. It's still moving along. It's just we are seeing some reports of advances by Ukrainian troops. Whew. By the way, War Gonzo always gives the war information from the Russian perspective. And while, again, this is a mark of a source that actually pays attention and tries to report facts as best as they know, they reliably call out when the Ukrainians are winning. They reliably call out when the Russians are winning. Their bias does show at times, but by and large, they do report relatively factual information, just from the opposite perspective that we normally see in the West. This video right here, I'm going to go ahead and play, is the... Oh, hold on, I got to refresh the screen here. It's been sitting up for a while, so I have not had it recent. This is Oleshki and the situation around Oleshki. You know what you don't see? People. You don't see any cars moving. You don't see any movement on the roads. There's no people, except for one or two. These two are just happen to be the only ones you see pretty much in the video. And it's so rare to see people actually active on the streets of a city that should be bustling. Oleshki's barely moving. There's barely any activity in it. People are afraid, scared, and in hiding in Oleshki. That's right on the Kherson direction. They know that things are changing, so they're avoiding getting out as much as they can. A little bit of information about, okay, Avdiivka here. This is a little bit of the information I've already reviewed. Basically, it kind of confirms the information that I've just discussed. They've failed in counterattacks beyond Terrakon and are now using mortars instead, whereas the Ukrainians are fighting and preventing the Russian army from approaching the Avdiivka coke plant. It also puts the lie to Russians' claims that they have taken that plant like 3 times now. Okay, I already talked about that. This is another source that mentions the situation on the H-20 near Avdiivka, northeast of Krasnohorivka. And it talks about the situation there, again, cutting off their supply and cutting off those troops. Null Reports has been a little bit bearish on the Russian situation in the area of Avdiivka. They have claimed to take this little slag heap right here multiple times, and yet Null Report still reports it as being in the gray zone instead. I have strong reasons to believe that Null Reports has better information than the average bear in this area. This is from yesterday. There were 2 successful attacks by Ukrainian missiles on 2 captured resort establishments on the Arabat Spit. Missile strikes indicated that they hit 2 recreation centers, the Uni boarding house and the Blue Flame boarding house in the village of Stelkovai. These are children's health resorts, and they were used by the Russians as basically rest and rehabilitation areas and command centers. So by bombing these locations, they've just taken out a whole lot of Russians. Ambulances responded, a lot of wounded, don't have any details beyond that. But that's what Russians have been doing. They take over any facility they can and just run with it. And now the Ukrainians are making sure they take that facility right out from under their noses with a bomb, or in this case, a missile. More information on the Dnipro River bridgehead. The Ukrainian forces have been establishing a precarious bridgeheads, and they have toeholds in the mucky lowlands, which provides poor terrain for Russian tank-led counterattacks, meaning it makes it harder for the Russians to actually move through those areas to counterattack. Now, that means that the Ukrainians have a tougher time bringing in heavy weapons. But overall, the situation there favors the Ukrainians. It's interesting to see it happening. Okay, we'll get into a few extra items here in just a moment. Let me go ahead and go back to the old camera here for a second. Yes, Phil, you may have just dated yourself just a touch. I think Omega Man was released in 1971. So you might have maybe dated yourself just a little bit. Okay, so let's see. Any comments we got to see here? Yeah, they do walk everywhere from everything I have seen. And it looks like Oleshki to me. That looks super empty. There was one car moving, maybe a half dozen or so people. And it's basically those that had to do things to survive. There's not the hustle and bustle of an active city. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the extras here. Let's see. Margarita is the sweetest Medusa ever. Russia always wins and gracefully performs humanitarian advances to the rear. Oh, yes, that's right out of Russia today, Phil. Love that. It's just, yeah, it's crazy out there, and the truth is that Russia is fighting a war on an information front where they have bad information all the time. All right, let's go ahead and move over to the extras here. The U.S. Select Committee on Intelligence declassified reports on Russia's subversion activities in the U.S. so the public would read them. And the story they share in this bit right here is a situation where Russians kind of took over a Facebook group or created a Facebook page, Heart of Texas, and promoted a protest in opposition to Islam to occur in front of the Islamic Dawah Center in Houston, Texas. This attracted 250,000 followers. They used targeted advertisements and asked their supporters to attend the Stop Islamization of Texas event slated for noon on May 21st. At the same time, Russian operatives went to the United Muslims for America Facebook page and its 325,000 followers and set up a second event. That event was May 21st, 2016 at noon. And it was a supporting Saving Islamic Knowledge demonstration. They deliberately arranged two opposing demonstrations for the same place at the same time. So, all in all, the Russians know where the weak spots are in the U.S. Culture, where the dividing lines are, and they know how to put pressure on it. This whole information campaign, this whole operation, cost Russia $200 for a couple of advertisements, and yet it did thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of division in the United States. This story is both sad and happy at the same time. The owner of this cat and this car was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Russia. This cat sat in this car for 4 days before the police would do anything. and they finally did rescue the cat after 4 days, which this cat obviously is just dying to get some attention and some help and some lovin's. But in the end, the cat was saved, and a potentially tragic situation turned into a happy one. And we'll end off with one more cat-related item. American scientists have found that cats have about 300 different facial expressions. Between four movements, which have 26 unique movements in total: open mouth, nose licking, pressed whiskers, ear position, etc. 45% of those facial expressions were identified as positive, 37% as negative, and the rest were ambiguous. They also mentioned that they may have learned many of these from humans. Really interesting, just a bit of study on the back end there. And that's everything for today. Yeah, that surprise look on number 6 there. That's wonderful. I think the grumpy look at number 4 and number 3 here are just about perfect. I feel like I see those expressions on my cats a lot. So that's everything for me. Is there any questions from anybody over here at this point? I'm happy to take a minute or two and see if there's any more comments or anything like that. I'll just quickly switch over to the camera here. I think we're in pretty good shape, and I'm pretty sure everybody's about 30 seconds behind what I actually work with here. So overall, I have reasons to have positive feelings about what's going on in Ukraine. The Ukraine war, I feel, was the start of it all. It's been going since 2014, and is the catalyst, the motivator, the motivator that finally, I think, allowed dictators and bad actors across the world to say that the West would do nothing to stop them. And I think that's kind of, if you track it back, I think it makes sense. Do I have alerts that go out to subscribers? If you subscribe to the channel and hit the old bell, it will notify you when I go live on the channel. When I do a U.S. political item, I do send out an email. So let me see. If you send an email to, let me get that over here. Got to check one thing here, make sure I still got it set up. Bear with me just 1 second here. The problem with setting up multiple emails is remembering all the passwords for them. I swear. Yep, that's it. Okay. I'm going to quickly type into the chat here. That is my email address. If you want me to send you a notification when I put out a regular video, if you'll just send me an email to that, say you would like to be added to my mailing list. It's a manual mailing list. I put you in there and add your email manually, so I can actually just send you a quick email when I submit a regular video. As far as the lives go, I don't send out anything special on that regard. But the system itself should send you details. If I can get organized enough and know when I'm going to do it, I'm going to start scheduling these in advance and try and have that go out an hour or two beforehand. But that's going to depend so much on what's going on and the rest of what's going on. So that's the situation there. Hey, happy to help out, Phil, and I'm glad to have you on board. Absolutely. Anybody else have any other questions? And it looks like I've already received your email, Phil. Thank you very much. I'll get you added. And that's, I think, everything for today. Again, thank you for joining me. And I do know this is less organized than a regular video, but I think I do feel this is important enough that even if I don't have the time to actually edit out a video, that I think these live streams at least gets that information out there and helps people to understand what's going on both in the world around the Ukraine war and inside Ukraine itself. At least I hope I do a good job of that. Thanks again, everybody, and you have a great rest of your day.